What's up, everybody? It's your man, MG Marcus Grant. And are you looking to stay up to date with the latest goings-on of your favorite, or maybe not so favorite NFL team? Well, how do you do that? You go directly to the source. Every week, Matty Kroll is doing just that with On the Beat, talking to beat reporters from across the National Football League. Be sure to check it out each and every week.
Yo, what is going on, y'all? It's your boy, it's your host, Calvin Domingo, a.k.a. Steezy A Smith, back at it yet again on another episode, on another edition of On Beat featuring the Cincinnati Bengals. Today, you guys know my saying by now, I have another VIG with me, a very important guest. He covers the Cincinnati Bengals for ESPN. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome ESPN's Ben Baby. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? That was a hell of an introduction.
Hey, I try. Thank you so much. I'm feeling wonderful though. Yourself?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to finally be in the middle of the offseason. It felt like that Bengals season just kept going and going. I don't think anybody anticipated the Bengals making a run to the Super Bowl and really being a possession away from winning it. So it's kind of been trying to play catch up, I think, not just for the folks covering the team, but for the Bengals as well, trying to get adjusted to this offseason. It's definitely been interesting, and they're about to be into OTAs, and they've already started OTAs, but, I think that's the next step in this offseason process.
Right. I mean, as someone who covers the Bengals, I'm not exactly sure how long you've been covering the Bengals, but I'm pretty sure you're not accustomed to covering the team all the way up until February. So I'm pretty sure that was definitely one hell of an experience. But before we talk about the Bengals, I want to get to know you just a little bit. So as a member of the Asian American Journalists Association, did you have any Asian American journalists that you idolized growing up? And this is a two-part question, but if so, actually, no, there aren't a lot of people that look like us, right, in the industry. And so for people out there that are brown skinned, for people out there that look like us, any sort of advice for any of those trying to break in?
I think to start off, to answer the first question, like you said, there wasn't really a whole lot. Kevin Nagandi was one of the ones that was on ESPN, and I saw him and met him whenever I did my first my new hire orientation when I was in Bristol. When I got hired in 2019, and then it was really cool during the Super Bowl build up. There was a Sports Center panel with me, Kevin, and Mina Kimes, who's also Asian American as well, and it didn't even hit me until after we wrapped that we had 3 Asian Americans talking about the NFL on Sports Center, which was a really cool experience to be a part of. But like I said, it didn't cross my mind until after we stopped taping. And so, the best advice I give to not just those who might be minorities, but anybody in general trying to get into the business, I think just apply yourself at your craft, really work hard and try to create try to get better at what you do, find out ways that you can improve on a daily basis, and just look for opportunities to apply yourselves. And if you do both of those things, more often than not, you're going to get an opportunity to show if you can do it and if you can be good enough at a certain level. So that's the best advice I can give to anybody.
Great advice. For anyone out there tuned in and listening, listen to that greatness. Listen to some greatness. But Ben, so you started your career as a full-time journalist 11 years ago at I want to make sure I say this correctly, the Denton Record Chronicle.
That's right.
So after a decade plus of being in the game, what about this job still excites you to this day? And did you know growing up that this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, to answer the second one, I definitely always knew this is what I want to do. And people always ask me, like, when did you know? I was like, since, it was about as like, I was like, I can't even tell you an age because it was that early. But I know that everything I've always kind of geared myself towards doing this. And yeah, I started out covering high schools at the Denton Record Chronicle. And we, that was the, covering high schools and going into it, you get to experience all the different parts of it. I mean, there's guys that I covered at the high school level who are in the league now, which is really cool. And really, it's just fun to see how things play out, especially in the NFL. You get new faces that come into locker rooms every year. You get new stories, new people you get to meet. And I think that's the fun part about it from a journalism side and a sports writer side. You get to tell people stories. You get to find out kind of maybe even guys that you've known for a while, what's different this year compared to the year before, what's new in their life, what has changed. And that's definitely been big. I mean, I covered boxing for ESPN as well. And I just talked to a fighter who's got a fight coming up in a couple of weeks. And, I said, we were basically catching up after a year. And, I said, yeah, we kind of had a similar conversation last year, but this is what changed in the year since we last talked. And I think that's always kind of the challenge. And that's what's exciting about it, is that nothing ever stays static. Everything is always changing, especially in the NFL. We've seen so much change throughout this offseason.
1000%. I mean, the changes has been drastic. It's definitely unprecedented Speaking of boxing, though, you talked about boxing. So I want to ask you one more question before we get into the Bengals. I saw on your Instagram story, you reposted ESPN's new pound for pound rankings list. And surprisingly, number 1 is Terrence Buck Crawford. Number 2, the Monster. Number 3, Errol Spence Jr., deservedly so. And then number 4, the previous pound for pound king, is now all of a sudden all the way down at number 4 after losing to, I'm forgetting his name, Bivol.
Bivol, yep.
Right. And so I got to ask you, what was your reaction to seeing that, and what would your revised top 5 pound for pound listing look like?
Yeah, I was a little shocked we put him that low, to be quite honest. I did not think that Canelo deserved to be dropped like that. I thought that was very harsh by our panel. We've got a lot of people that vote on it. I personally had Canelo at number 2 behind, but I thought that was a pretty fair list. I'll read the top 5. I had my top 5 is Bud Crawford, who was the undisputed junior welterweight champion, now holds a belt at welterweight. I think is phenomenal. I was there, saw him beat Sean Porter in Vegas. He looks every bit the real deal. Obviously, Canelo Alvarez, you don't need to explain who that is. Alexander Usyk, I've got him at number 3. You're talking about a guy who was the undisputed cruiserweight champion, then went up, and to go ahead and beat Anthony Joshua the way he did, I thought was very impressive. Wasn't like how Andy Ruiz beat Anthony Joshua caught him with the punch. Usyk systemically beat Joshua down, and for what he's done in multiple weight classes, I think is very impressive. Number 4, obviously, I've got Naoya Inoue, the Monster. He's been very good at the lower weight classes. And then Errol Spence at number 5. I think when you look at what he's done, there's a lot of questions about him because he's never really fought anybody outside of PBC. I think that is something that has been a question mark on him, but he's looked very impressive. I thought he was sublime against Ugas, just how well he performed against a very quality champion, and now holds 3 of the 4 belts at welterweight. And I know that listeners who are expecting some NFL talk just got a big crash course in the fight game, but there's not, you got to fit it in somewhere. But that's how our pound for pound shook out. And yeah, the comments on that, they were not pretty, but that's the whole point of a pound for pound list. That's why we talk about the football in the offseason. That's why we rank teams. It's because we generate discussions. And yeah, not everybody's going to agree with it. Obviously, everybody on our panel voted differently. But I think that's the fun in it, that the fun in sports is arguing about it, talking about it, debating about it, and then seeing it play out. And that's kind of the whole point of all this. So if you're not having fun doing that and creating some conversation, what's the point of it?
1,000%. I mean, I gotta agree wholeheartedly. And just to bounce off of that question, do you have any sort of insight as to when a potential Bud Crawford and Errol Spence fight is going to happen?
Yeah, I asked Errol's trainer, Derek James, who I've known for a little bit, right after the fight, because I was there for Spence Ugas, and Derek said Errol's a man of his word. He wanted to unify 3 of the 4 belts. He ended up doing that in beating the competition that he did, going and beating Sean Porter, getting his belt, going and beating, going through the division the way he did, finally getting Ugas's belt, now holding 3 of the 4. And I think that, I talked to Errol back when he became a champion and when he had his first title defense after he beat Kell Brook, and he understood the need for fighting Bud, being able to have that as part of his legacy as well, and wanted to make it when the time was right. I think that, you're probably right. I would imagine there's really no other fight for Errol or Bud that makes sense. Bud is no longer with Top Rank. And so, I could see now that there should be no, political obligations that withhold that fight from happening. So I would think that would be next, but I think we've been saying that for a while. So there's only one way to know, and hopefully we'll find out soon enough.
Right. I mean, I'm glad it wasn't Pacquiao that Errol Spence fought, because, I'm a big Pacquiao guy, and with the way that Errol Spence was able to just dismantle Ugas, especially in the later rounds. I mean, oh my gosh, I'm just thinking about Pac and like, man, he would have got dominated. I mean, and I love Pac, and you were talking about it, but Pac and Mayweather, I mean, that was supposed to happen for years, and it didn't end up happening until they were both, closer to their 40s. And so I hope that doesn't occur with Bud and Errol Spence, but it looks like there's a little bit more confidence in that happening than there ever was for Pacquiao and Mayweather. Moving on to the NFL, though, the Cincinnati Bengals. So they had 6 draft picks and a couple weeks ago, and they spent 5 of those 6 draft picks on defense, specifically 3 at defensive back. So I got to ask, which pick was your favorite, and what grade would you give the Bengals draft?
I give the Bengals draft, I'd probably say I go about a B, a solid B. I think is good. Maybe I B minus is a little harsh, but because I would go, the reason I go B is because a lot of people look at this draft, and obviously, like you talked about, 5 of the 6 picks on defense, the one offensive guy, Cordell Volson, a guy who could come in and start at left guard. We'll see what he looks like in training camp. Obviously, that's going to be one of the biggest position battles throughout the offseason. But the Bengals weren't really drafting for 2022. They're really drafting for 2023. They didn't need any starters. They got a lot of guys who will give them depth in the short term, and the guys like Dax Hill, CTP, who can come in and play, give you some rotation at defensive back, but then potentially be starters in 2023. That's really what you're looking for. So I think that's, that's why it's so hard to maybe grade this Bengals draft, because there are a lot of unknowns. You're getting, a lot of later picks and later rounds. Dax Hill was at the end of the first. I think that was a very solid pick. Fits what Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator, wants to do very well. A very athletic group, a lot of speed they want to put on the field, but it's very difficult to see, just exactly how this is going to play out, because it's not going to be a while even throughout this year. It's not like, the last couple of years when they get Joe Burrow, they get Jamar Chase, and they do some work in the middle rounds. But, the Bengals historically have been good at finding guys in the middle of the draft who can be key contributors for them. We see that with last year's defense and third-round pick Logan Wilson, who came in 2020, Jermaine Pratt, a fourth-round pick in 2019. So they've done well on the defensive side of the ball doing that. So we'll see if that trend continues this year.
No doubt. So you talked about Dax Hill. Does this mean that Jessie Bates isn't going to sign a long-term contract with the Cincinnati Bengals? And if it comes to that point, what sort of compensation should the Bengals be looking to receive?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Right now, Jessie is the penciled-in starter at free safety for the Bengals. The Bengals gave him a franchise tag after the two sides weren't able to come up to a long-term extension. And my question is, when people talk about, the possibility of it getting it done, what's changed? Has somebody changed? I mean, that's the thing. Somebody has to budge. And at this point, do the Bengals now have the cap space to make it work? They've allocated their money in free agency. You have big contracts that are going to be due next year. When you talk about Joe Burrow's extension, a potential T. Higgins extension, a potential Logan Wilson extension, where does Jessie Bates fit in when you get drafted a guy who might be his replacement? And if you notice, when the Bengals announced that Jessie Bates was given the franchise tag, Katie Blackburn, the team's executive vice president, had an interesting statement that said, we've negotiated with Jessie and we weren't able to get to a deal, and we're excited about the 2022 season. If you notice, the fact that they put in a definitive year leads me to believe, you make me not as confident that there is going to be continuing discussions to get a long-term deal done. And if that's the case, what do the Bengals do? Do the Bengals feel like they can go trade for him? Is a team going to be willing to take on that money of Jessie Bates, cap it with the franchise tag in place, maybe a sign and trade? Is a team going to be trading for him, going to commit to a long-term deal? There's a lot of moving parts in that discussion. And, it may just be easier for Jessie to play out the franchise tag, hit free agency next year and see what he's worth on the open market, because he is still very young. But like you said, I think when we saw Dax Hill get drafted, we said, okay, this is a guy who could potentially be Jessie Bates' replacement. And, those are big shoes to fill, because I think Jessie Bates is one of the best safeties in the NFL.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that's why I'm surprised as to why a deal hasn't gotten done. When I saw the drafting of a Dax Hill in the first round, it was like, oh my, like it looks imminent now. And so I wouldn't be surprised if before the season he does end up being traded. Well, we talked about free agency, though. So in the draft, we also talked about the draft. In the draft, they addressed mainly defense. In free agency, 3 starters on the offensive line: center, right guard, and right tackle. Is it a safe bet to say that Joe Burrow isn't going to be taking 70-plus sacks again next year? And then this is also a 2-part question. Do you think the Bengals have the most improved offensive line in all the NFL?
Oh, that's hard to say about the most improved offensive line, but it should better be better. That's the one thing. Right. Like you said, Joe Burrow can't be getting sacked 70 times a game, 70 times in a season. The Bengals admitted that. I think when you saw the money they spent, the fact that they announced Alex Kappa or Adam Schefter reported it as soon as the free agency negotiating window opened, that showed you that the Bengals were very determined to fix that offensive line. And they deserve some criticism for not doing enough for that line in 2020. I think you could say, oh, well, you can't spend money on everything when you look at the money they've spent in free agency. But, I think there are things they could have done to maybe be a little bit more competitive and fix that side of the ball. And they definitely paid the price in the postseason, because had that offensive line been a little bit better, the Bengals are probably Super Bowl champions right now. And so I think that's a big thing that they needed to address. They definitely did that. And no matter what happens, I think that you need two things to occur. I think you need I think that the one guy who has escaped some criticism in this, and rightfully so to some degree, is Joe Burrow. And I think that Burrow has a lot to do with his sack number as well. It's not just all on the offensive line. I think, Burrow has had to find a balance of, he's a natural playmaker. He's a guy who wants the ball in his hands, and he wants to keep the ball to as long as possible in order to make a play. And over the last, his first 2 seasons in the league, we've seen a progression in how he's went about figuring out that balance between do I hold on to the ball or do I try to get rid of it and live to the next down? And I think we're going to continue to see that maturation and that progression as he enters his 3rd year, and he'll get a better sense and a feel for, okay, how much pressure can I take and how much pressure should I evade? And, what's worth a hit and what isn't. And Joe Burrow's a guy who likes to get hit. He enjoys the physical part of the game, but as we see him continue to get older and really understand the game a little bit more, I wouldn't be shocked if that also plays a factor in that sack number dropping. And I think that's just as important as him getting a cleaner pocket.
I agree. So speaking of Joe Burrow, though, he's extension eligible a year from now. Do you see him becoming the second quarterback after Aaron Rodgers to command $50+ million on an annual average basis?
It's a good question. It's going to be the question we're all going to be wondering. I will say this. I don't know about the exact number, but I would be stunned if he wasn't one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL, if not the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. You look at everything the Bengals have done, even before he got here in Cincinnati. They have built their entire franchise around supporting him. That means spending money externally on free agents, making sure that they have a scheme that's conducive to the way that he wants to run the offense, giving him input like they have other quarterbacks in terms of, what the franchise should look like, what the roster should look like, valuing his opinion. I mean, he is the true definition of a franchise quarterback. And if you've already committed this much to supporting Burrow, it's not too much of a leap to make sure that he feels financially supported as well. And I think the dollars are going to come his way. Obviously, you see what he's done, leading the team to the Super Bowl in just his 2nd season and 1 year removed from a knee injury that was very, very severe and limited him at the beginning of the season. I think the other thing is they need the big question I have is Joe Burrow going to get paid? I think are the Bengals going to continue to support him at the level they have? And we're starting to see that they are changing the way they operate as a franchise, whether they want to admit this or not. We talked about them dipping into free agency for external guys, something they really haven't done previously. They are now looking at building an indoor practice facility, a temporary bubble, and then a permanent facility in the coming years, which is something that is a good sign for them moving forward. And it puts them, what other teams across all levels of football are doing. And so as long as you're continuing to see that support and you're seeing the franchise really move in that direction, I think for me, that's probably the biggest vote of confidence Joe Burrow can get aside from the dollars. But I do expect him to be getting that bag sooner rather than later because the Bengals historically have not been shy about paying their quarterbacks, and they definitely feel like they have a true number 1 quarterback in Joe Burrow.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it'd be a no-brainer. And with a guy like a Joe Burrow, I mean, not only is he a franchise quarterback, he's a transcendent type of talent. And I feel like with the Joe Burrow, like you talked about, he's definitely changed the entire calculus of how the Bengals move. I mean, I'm blanking on the owner's name, but he's notoriously known as a frugal type of owner. And like you talked about, they're already dipping outside into free agency. Now you're going to have to pay Joe Burrow, and you have to pay Jamar Chase and then T. Higgins and so forth. But Jamar Chase, he's coming off arguably the greatest rookie wide receiver season that we've ever seen. In terms of yardage, it's the 2nd most all-time by a rookie. And so what can we expect from an encore from Jamar Chase year 2?
Yeah, I think he's going to continue to get better. And I think that might have been the best season ever by a Bengals wide receiver, rookie or not. When you look at the way he's already climbed up the record books, he had a phenomenal rookie year. I think it's only going to get better for him when you look at, how he studies the game, how he analyzes defenses and defensive backs. You give him another year of familiarity with NFL schemes, with another year under his belt of playing with Joe Burrow. I think he's going to do really well. And the other component is I think T. Higgins is just as important on the other side of the ball, because if you're a defense, you really have to pick your poison. We saw that whenever defenses decided to cloud and double team Jamar Chase, T. Higgins really started to go off, and they feel like if you put him in a one-on-one situation, Higgins can come down with the ball. And we saw that in the Super Bowl. The guy had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns and had the play at the start of the second half that really should have put the game in the Bengals' favor and really should have helped them seal it away. And so I feel like that's a very valuable guy to have on your offense. And so both of those guys working in tandem is huge. But, Jamar Chase already considered one of the best receivers in the NFL. I think we're going to continue to see that. He's shown elite traits that he showed at LSU, and it's why, Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan, I think he was asked the other day, who was the most impressive guy he had ever seen on tape leading up to the draft. And he said Jamar Chase, he's a guy that was really impressive. And so I think the Bengals definitely got what they were looking for in the number 5 overall pick in 2021. And Chase and Burrow, that combination should continue to be one of the best in the NFL. So I'm interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think with Jamar Chase's arrival, not only has that kind of inspired other teams to look for wide receivers early in the draft, and they've kind of placed more of a premium on wide receivers, we're also seeing more and more teams kind of, I guess, pairing up receivers who played with their quarterbacks in college. And so I think he's done a lot more, than just what he's done on the field. He's also kind of impacted a lot of things off the field. And it's crazy to even think that it was a year ago today and where people were making a big deal of all those drops, right, in training camp and OTAs and whatnot. Now here we are talking about him as a top 5 wide receiver in the National Football League. And so how much can things change in a year? But I want to go back to the Bengals Super Bowl run from last year. There are a lot of people that kind of talk about how, it was a fluke or they kind of got lucky, blah, 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 yada, 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 yada. So what would you say to those who believe the Bengals are just a one-year wonder or a fluke?
I honestly, Bengals fans are going to get really angry at this. I don't think that it was a fluke, but I think that they definitely got a lot of things in their favor. They took advantage of a schedule that was given to the worst team in the division. So they played other teams who were not very good. They had a lot of injury. They were very fortunate not to have any key injuries. And to be honest, they were able to make plays in crunch time throughout the postseason. I mean, what happens if the Raiders, let's go back to the wild card game. What happens if Jermaine Pratt doesn't get an interception towards the end of the game and the Raiders end up scoring? That immediately ends their season right there. I mean, they had a couple of drives go their way. What happens if let's go back to the Denver game a few games earlier. The Bengals were coming off a 2-game losing streak, really couldn't afford to have that go to 3. That was in December. What happens if Drew Lock ends up scoring a touchdown and doesn't get stripped by Khalid Kareem, and then the Bengals, end up losing that game? I think that they had a lot of good things go their way, and the Bengals deserve a ton of credit. So I don't want people to hear this the wrong way. But they did take advantage. I mean, the margins are so slim in the NFL, and it only takes a few things for that to change and go the other way. I don't think it was, when you look at how bad, the one thing that was definitely not a fluke was how dominant they were in the AFC North. They were by far and away the number 1 team in the division. They played much better against divisional opponents, Cleveland aside, than anybody else. They dominated Baltimore in both games, really outplayed Pittsburgh, and really, aside from that Cleveland game in the middle of the year, looked phenomenal in their divisional games. And I think that will continue. I still think they should be the odds-on favorite, even though they aren't on the Vegas odds of winning the AFC North. But they're going to get everybody's best shot this year. And when you look at the Caesar sports books, a lot of people are wondering, bettors are wondering, can the Bengals replicate that success? Right now, the Browns actually have a better odds of winning the division. The Bengals are in the middle of the pack, which is crazy considering they're bringing basically everybody back from the Super Bowl run. They're in the middle of the pack to go back to the Super Bowl and potentially win it. And so they do have a lot to prove. And so whether the team fully believes that they have, that it wasn't a fluke and that it's replicable. And I think that's the thing that, there have been a lot of questions about, is there a chip on the shoulder? Is it still going to be there? And I think it's definitely going to be there because of what you just said, that there are going to be people who wondered, can they do it again? And it's up to the Bengals to prove it because, it's easy for a team to be good for a year and then kind of fade away. It's so much more difficult to have sustained success, especially in the league like the NFL, which is built for parity. So this is going to be a big challenge for them. But, when you talk about some of the guys we talked about, we talk about Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Logan Wilson, they're going to have the guys built for the long haul. And I think they built it the right way. So, I don't think it was necessarily a fluke. I think they caught a lot of good breaks, but I think they'll be able to put themselves in a position to take advantage of those opportunities again.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you brought up Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and whatnot. These guys are on rookie scale deals, playing premium positions, and they're elite talents, top 5, top 10 at their position. And so they're definitely in position to succeed in the long run. You talked about them potentially still being favorites in the AFC North. And we're looking at the AFC right now. There's a whole bunch of teams making moves. We have everybody flocking over to the AFC. And so that being said, with all these teams stacked in the AFC, with all these Super Bowl contenders in the AFC, where would you rank the Bengals in the American Football Conference as of today?
Oh, that's a good question. I would definitely, and people are going to get, Bengals fans are going to get mad at me once they get a hold of this, but I mean, I think that you look at what the Bills have done, you look at what Kansas City's done. A lot of the teams, that whole AFC West just looks like a complete monster. Like I do not want to be in that division. So the NFL, the AFC should be very fortunate that only so many teams get out of that division. But I mean, we could see it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that we see 3 teams out of the AFC West in the postseason, with both teams that are the division champ getting the wild card berths. But I would put the Bengals, I would think I'd put them third right now. I do like what a lot of those teams did. I like what Denver did. I really love what the Chargers have done. And obviously there's going to be that a lot of conversation about Herbert and Burrow as they continue to get older and are 2 of the top young quarterbacks in the NFL. But when you look at what the Bengals have done, when you look at the growth that they've showed, and when you look at the pieces coming back, I do think that they are still one of the top teams in the division. But they're going to have to go out and contend with a lot of teams that got a lot stronger as well. But I said right now I would put Buffalo and Kansas City up there, and then I put the Bengals right in that mix, right in that top tier.
Oh, no doubt. I definitely have them in my top 3, top 4 as well. So I can't fault you for that. 2 more questions though before we let you go. One's actually a fantasy question. You play fantasy football, right?
I do. I mean, you have to these days.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So fantasy-wise, which of the 2 between Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon should owners look to take first in redraft leagues?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't. So I'm going to need a good explanation. I'm sure some listeners will as well. Can you explain to me what a redraft league is? Because I usually play a traditional league.
Oh, that's a traditional. Redraft is just like those yearly leagues where they
kind of. It's not a dynasty league.
Yeah, it's not a dynasty league.
Okay, yeah. So if you're starting from scratch this year and you had both those guys on the board, you're taking Joe Mixon or you're taking Jamar Chase. Mm-hmm. I'm taking Jamar Chase. I know that's going to be a little high right now, especially when you look at running back as such a premium position. But my question is, last year we were told that Joe Mixon was going to be a 3-down running back and going to be a guy who could be on the field. And the reason that's so important for fantasy managers is that if Joe Mixon is on the field for 3rd downs, those are traditionally passing downs. That means that there's going to be, if you're in a points per reception league, there's a chance that he's going to get more targets in the passing game, going to get more points that way, and that makes him so much more of a valuable running back. But because he wasn't last year, are we going to see that jump? He's been in the league now for enough time to where I feel at this point you're either a 3-down back or you're not. Are we going to see that growth and develop from him this year? I don't know, especially when you have a guy like Chris Evans who has been good in the passing game. And for whatever reason, Mixon's passing numbers are what they are. And I know that a lot of Bengals fans will say, Mixon has traditionally done very well. He has been a good resource for and been productive for fantasy managers. But all of that being said, those are my reservations. If I personally am on the board to draft Joe Mixon, I think that Jamar Chase this year, when you look at what the Bengals have done, look at their identity as an offense and how they attack teams, I think, and especially when you look at how tight the schedule is going to be, these are going to be some very close games. You're talking about them playing now division champs. They're going to be playing Buffalo. They're going to be playing Kansas City. In the NFC, they're going to be playing Tampa Bay. These are going to be some tight games they're going to be in throughout the season, which means that they're going to be passing the ball a lot. This is a team that runs 11 personnel. They like to throw it around. And Jamar Chase in year 2, I think is going to be a very, I think that's going to be a guy who's going to continue to have that sustained success. And now that the Bengals offensive line has gotten better, I think the volume of passing could also be a lot higher than it was last year. I think last year we saw more of a balanced attack, and now that they have a better pass blocking, does that mean the Bengals are going to drop back and pass a little bit more like we saw in the games where Jamar was popping off at the end of the year against Kansas City, against Baltimore? So all of those reasons, I don't think Joe Mixon's a bad play. I think that there are some other running backs I would take ahead of him. I think if you draft him, you're still probably going to get a pretty reliable guy, especially with an upside that he may potentially be more used in the pass game. But given those 2, I would take Jamar Chase.
Wow, it's crazy to think that Jamar Chase could potentially have an even better year in store come year 2. Here's to hoping the sophomore slump doesn't come into play. And one more question before we wrap things up here. But before I get into that, I did read your last article. One of your articles talking about how Samaje Perine was actually the Bengals' primary option on 3rd down. Real quick, do you see that? I know you just talked about Joe Mixon potentially getting more work on 3rd down, but I mean, why would they take away from a Samaje Perine if he did such a good job last year?
I mean, you're paying a guy in Joe Mixon to be essentially a 3-down back. You paid him good money to be a running back. I think that's the expectation. He talked about that. He wants to be that. I think they put, whenever they cut Giovanni Bernard after the 2020 season, they basically said, here you go. You can be that guy. And I think that they, privately would like his third down snap share to be a little bit higher. So I think that would be the case. It's just another, it's another guy that defenses have to account for. It helps you be more multiple as an offense. When you have Samaje in there, he's probably going to be a pass blocking set. The Bengals are going to be passing and Mixon's on the field. You are able to say, okay, maybe it might be a run or a pass here, depending on the down and distance. So I think that there are reasons for Mixon to be on the field for third downs. I think it's a good asset for the Bengals to have. And, I think you can explain it one way or another, but that's definitely not a bad thing if you can get him on the field and manage his snap count in an appropriate manner.
Most definitely. So in your short time at ESPN, Ben, do you have a favorite player or like a favorite experience that you'd want to share?
It's a good question. Honestly, there's a lot of good guys that have come through the locker room over the years. We just lost one. We lost a couple to the Jets out of the Bengals press corps, and Carl Lawson and CJ Uzama. I know that we loved talking to both of those guys. Those guys were always really insightful, always really honest. One of the current guys on the roster who I really enjoy talking to, I think, is DJ Reader, defensive tackle, who I think, for my money, is actually, and between him and Jessie Bates, those are the two best guys on the defense by a mile. And I think you could argue that Reader might be more important to the defense than Jessie Bates is, given what he's done and how disruptive he is in the middle. And I think he's a big reason why you saw, some one-on-one matchups on the edge, and why you saw everybody on the defensive line eating last year and getting those good sack numbers, because Reader is so disruptive on the inside. And you can tell he's a guy who's really passionate about the game. He understands what counts and what doesn't. And he's a true vet, and he's someone who's going to tell you exactly I don't think he beats around the bush, and he's just a really genuine, insightful guy to talk to and speak to. So he's a guy that I really enjoy, and luckily this team has a lot of those guys. Whether you've got Eli Apple, you got Chidobe Awuzie, you got Von Bell, you got Jessie Bates, Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard. I mean, there's a lot of guys who are fun characters. And I think that's why that locker room gelled so well last year. It is a big reason why they're in the Super Bowl. It's a lot of guys who are fun to be around and like to be around each other. And I think when you have that chemistry and dynamic, it leads to on-field success. And as media members, we reap the rewards of that by getting to talk to people we like to be around as well. So, I think that there's a lot that makes our job, even when the teams aren't good, a lot more enjoyable, is that when you have people that you like to talk to and they like to talk to you, it makes things better for both of us.
Yeah, you talked about how, as media members, you guys get to reap some of the rewards, just sharing the locker room, or even sharing the same room, sharing the same space as a Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. I feel like, their swag is contagious, just being around them. And so I feel like you've definitely picked up on that. But Ben, you know what they say, time flies when you're having fun. So before we do wrap things up here, I do want to give you an opportunity to kind of plug yourself, shout out any socials, let the people know what's coming up next. And floor is yours.
Yeah, just on ESPN.com, go to the Bengals page. If you have the ESPN app, make sure you have the Bengals personalized as one of your teams if you're looking for Bengals content. And then also, like you said, we talked about earlier, we do a ton of stuff on the boxing side. Got a lot of good fights coming up this summer. So we'll be writing about that, talking about that. So all in all, a lot of good sports are going to be back in full swing. So I'm excited. It should be a fun 2022.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's ESPN's Bengals reporter, Ben Baby. Again, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time with us. This has been another episode of On Beat featuring the Cincinnati Bengals. Ladies and gentlemen, again, give it up for Ben Baby. Let's go. Hope you guys have a great day. Appreciate y'all.